article about a mother hen who broods the eggs and cares for the chicks when they hatch out. If you have a really good mother hen, she's worth her weight in gold. But we don't all have a superb broody mother hen. Sometimes we use an incubator to hatch chicks. I have a video about the pros and cons of incubators compared to a broody hen for hatching eggs. For the purposes of this video, we're going to assume that you're using an incubator for hatching eggs. A couple of my subscribers asked what incubator they should get. I probably can't give you the kind of simple answer that you would like, but I can give you an idea of the sorts of things you should take into consideration when making your decision about which incubator to buy. In general, the cost of an incubator depends on the kind of features that it has. What incubators do is stir the air around, measure and maintain the temperature, measure and maintain the right humidity, turn the eggs, hold a certain number of eggs, and a couple of other nifty things if it's a fancy one. So let's look at each in detail so you can consider how important that is for you. There are two main kinds of incubator, forced air and still air. In still air incubators, the heat and humidity in the incubation chamber is maintained largely through insulation of the chamber walls. In forced air incubators, there may be warm or warm humid air being pumped through the incubation chamber all the time, or at the very least a fan to stir the air inside the incubator chamber. A still air incubator is slower to reach stable temperature when you first turn it on or when you're trying to adjust it, but it retains its temperature for longer if there happens to be a power cut. Airflow is needed to provide the chick with oxygen. A still air incubator relies on the natural drift of warm air upwards and out of the vents, while drawing in cooler, fresh air. Because this drift is so slow, there's likely to be up to 5 degrees difference in temperature from areas near the heating element compared to areas further away. So it's important to take the temperature reading from the level where the eggs are. A forced air incubator will have a much more even temperature distribution throughout the chamber. Because a still air incubator is generally easier to make, many homemade incubators are the still air type. Lots of people tell me they have good success with homemade incubators. When I first started hatching chicks, I tried a couple of versions of homemade incubators, but none of them worked very well. I found the results so disappointing that I finally purchased a commercially made forced air incubator. And right from my very first batch of eggs in the new incubator, the results were much more successful. The most important part of any incubator is the temperature control. For most of the 21 days of incubation of chicken eggs, the temperature must be maintained between 99 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 37 to 39 degrees Celsius. It's a very tight temperature range, and achieving it needs an excellent thermostat and reactive heating element. So your incubator will have some kind of thermostat. In general, electronically controlled thermostats are more precise than the old-fashioned wafer thermostat, and their tight control is likely to increase your chances of a good hatch rate. When you're choosing an incubator, notice how easy it is to change the thermostat. If it's too easy to accidentally bump the dial or press the button, you'll need to be very careful when you're moving around the incubator. Even with a forced air incubator, there's likely to be some temperature variation in different areas of the chamber. If you can, you should measure the temperature in each place, near the air outlet, near the floor, near the top, and so on. If the temperature varies a lot, you might need to avoid putting eggs in some spots, or just rotate the eggs through the various locations so you don't have a wide variation in hatch time. There is usually some kind of temperature measurement device, so you know what the temperature is. It might be digital or an analog thermometer. If yours doesn't, you will need a separate thermometer. It's a good idea to check the accuracy of the temperature readout against a thermometer that you know is accurate. Humidity is the amount of water vapour that is present in the air. Relative humidity is expressed as a percentage of the amount of water that is in the air compared to how much water the air could possibly contain at that particular temperature. The ideal humidity for hatching eggs is 50% for most of the incubation period, and then 65 to 75% for the last 3 days right before hatching. Some incubators add water vapour directly under automatic control, while others have a dish of water that is allowed to evaporate into the incubation chamber. In this system, you need to adjust the humidity manually by adding more or less surface area of water. It's the surface area of the water that affects how much water vapour evaporates, not the volume of water. Just adding more water to the original container won't increase the humidity. When you need to increase the humidity, you need to add more or wider dishes of water so the surface area is greater. In order to control the humidity, it's helpful to know what the humidity is. There are 3 main ways to measure humidity: using a hygrometer, using a wet bulb thermometer, or by measuring the loss of water from the eggs themselves during incubation. The incubators with an automatic humidity readout will be using a hygrometer. If your chosen incubator doesn't have one, you can buy a hygrometer separately to the incubator. Alternatively, you can use a wet bulb thermometer or actually measure the amount of water lost from the eggs and adjust the humidity to achieve the required amount of water loss so the air cell inside the egg is the right size at hatching time. Both of these are a little bit complicated, so perhaps we'll talk about them in another video. But don't be daunted. A hygrometer is very useful, but not completely essential, especially if you have the incubator in a room that has a fairly stable humidity. Some incubators turn the eggs automatically for you, and others you have to turn the eggs manually. If you're turning them manually, you need to turn each egg at least 3 times a day. Turning 3 times a day is the bare minimum. More is better. In fact, turning the egg 12 to 24 times a day would be ideal, but it's unlikely that you'd have someone on hand 24/7 to do this. So you'll probably choose a schedule such as turning first thing in the morning, 1 or more times during the day, and then last thing before you go to sleep. Of course, this schedule always has one long period between the last nighttime turn and the first morning turn. It's important that your schedule includes an odd number of times of turning, so this long overnight gap between turnings doesn't always work out to have the eggs resting on the same side as they were last night and every night. So choose a turning schedule of 3 times a day or 5 times a day or so forth. It's probably a good idea to set an alarm or other reminder so you don't forget to do a turn. If you're turning the eggs manually, you will almost certainly need to mark the eggs so you know which ones you have turned this time. Use a pencil, not a ballpoint or marker pen. Pencil lead, which is graphite, doesn't go through the pores of the eggshell, but ink might. I found it helpful to keep a note of which side of the eggs was up during each overnight period, in case I got confused about which way up they had been last night. And turn them first one way and then back the other way, rather than spiralling them around and around in the same direction all the time. If your incubator includes an automatic turning feature, you won't need to worry so much about these details. They will all be taken care of for you in the programming of the automatic turner. Nevertheless, I find that although my incubator has an automatic turning function, I get better hatch rates if I also turn the eggs manually once a day and move the eggs around the incubation chamber when I do this. I'm not sure whether it's the extra turning that makes the difference or the fact that by moving the eggs around to different positions in the incubator, I'm evening out any temperature variation between different areas of the chamber. So you might want to consider some manual turning in addition to your automatic turning function. At least you only have to do this once a day instead of once an hour. One aspect of the incubator that you will want to consider is how many eggs it can incubate at once. There are a lot of very popular incubators that hold only 3 or 5 eggs at a time, and you will often hear people advise new chicken owners to start with a small incubator. But I believe you definitely need to be able to incubate more than 3 eggs at a time. That's because not all of the eggs will hatch. It's not unreasonable to expect that up to 10% of the eggs will not be fertile, even if you've purchased eggs from a reputable breeder. And then some of the chicks that do start to grow will just not manage to stay the course all the way through 21 days of development. And even those that do make it to day 20, some might not manage to break out of the shell and hatch successfully. So you can't count on setting 3 eggs in the incubator and having 3 chicks hatch out 21 days later. You need to set more eggs to count on having enough chicks. How many is enough chicks? Well, it depends on what you want them for. But 1 chick is never enough on its own. Chickens are flock animals and they like constant companionship 24/7, which even the most dedicated pet owner is not going to be able to provide. If you happen to have a broody hen who will mother the chicks for you, then 1 chick can be raised successfully. But quite likely you're using an incubator because you don't have a good, reliable broody mother hen. So you want to hatch a minimum of 3 chicks, just for their own well-being, and that means probably setting about 12 eggs. You might think that a smaller incubator could do, and you can hatch several batches of chicks, maybe hatching 2 or 3 chicks in each batch, and then another batch, and so on, until you get the number of live chicks that you want that season. The trouble with this plan is that you will end up with multiple sets of chicks of various ages, and each group of chicks will need to be raised separately because at each age they will have different requirements for heating and space. Plus the fragile little ones are likely to get trampled by the boisterous older chick. So unless you have several facilities for managing several sets of chicks of various ages, you're much better off to hatch just 1 or 2 batches of chicks per season, which means yes, you need an incubator that will hold about a dozen eggs. And yes, you're only going to use it about once a year. But trust me, it's worth it. I suggest you get an incubator with a clear lid or hatch so that you can watch the chicks hatching without disturbing the warm and humid environment that they need. I find it's almost impossible to simply wait the allotted time without peeking at what's going on. So I think some way of seeing inside without opening the incubator is pretty much essential. So as you've seen, the incubator that I have is a very basic one. It's a forced air type with automatic turning and temperature control, but everything else is manual. It has a plain glass thermometer with no hygrometer. I think that mine is an example of about the simplest incubator that you should consider. I use it in a room that has quite a constant temperature and is not subject to huge swings in humidity, which makes it easier to maintain the right conditions inside the incubator. Because it has so few automatic features, it was at the lower end of the price range, but it was a good quality brand, and I think that's important. An incubator that is at the lower end of the price range but has lots of features might not be reliable in hatching the eggs, and that's a waste of fertile eggs, which themselves are quite expensive. I have a video about how to set it up and get the best success rate from a simple incubator like mine. Whatever choices you make about whatever kind of incubator you buy and what features you want it to have, I hope it hatches lots of batches of healthy baby chicks for you. Best wishes. Thanks for watching. See you next time.